So I have a 3-year-old son, and my wife also works in marine conservation. So as you can imagine, sharks are a popular topic in my house, and they're probably popular for most of us in the room today. They're charismatic megafauna. Sharks predate dinosaurs. Sharks are also related to rays, so rays fall into the conversation that I'm having today, and rays are around 250 million years old. To start the conversation, sharks are disappearing before our eyes. It sort of is, it plays a little bit on sustainability and what are we going to do in the future here. And why are they disappearing before our eyes? Well, primarily, one of the major issues most of you have heard about is shark finning. There is a lot of confusion about what shark finning is and is not, and actually, I'll be honest, I'm not a marine biologist. I came into my current job from an activist realm, and I didn't fully understand. I thought I did. I didn't fully understand what shark finning was, had elements of it. So Project Aware has worked globally with a lot of different alliances, and one of them we worked with is called the Shark Alliance in Europe. We worked on a European Union finning ban. They've created a short video that will help visually and show you what shark finning is in a concise way, better than I can do it. So I'll just go ahead. Sorry.
Third of shark, ray, and skate species in Europe are threatened with extinction. Despite the threats facing sharks, many European shark fishing operations remain unregulated. One of the threats facing sharks is finning. What is shark finning? Commercially, fins are by far the most valuable part of a shark. Finning is the practice of slicing off a shark's fins and discarding the body at sea. Finning was banned in Europe in 2003, but the ban is one of the weakest in the world, as loopholes make it hard to know if finning is taking place. Hundreds of fishing boats from Spain and Portugal have been issued special permits allowing them to remove shark fins on board and to land shark bodies and fins separately at different ports. If inspections are made, officials must rely on fishermen's logbooks and a complicated, excessive ratio of the theoretical weight of a shark's whole body against the weight of the severed fins. Experts have estimated that the current limit on fin-to-body weight ratio could lead to 2 out of 3 sharks being finned without detection or punishment. So, what's the solution? The best way to prevent finning is to make sure that sharks are always landed with their fins still naturally attached, and more countries around the world are adopting this strategy. The European Commission has proposed that the EU finning ban be amended to adopt this policy. Fishing ministers from most EU member states, apart from Spain and Portugal, agree. The European Parliament also needs to support the proposal, and MEPs are debating it and are expected to come to a final decision soon. Visit www.sharkalliance.org to learn more and stay informed.
Okay, so that video is meant to simplify what is actually a very complex issue, and I think it does a good job, but finning is a complex concept. But it's built around the premise, basically, that there are sharks out there that are going to be caught and eaten, and it's based on sustainable science. That's what's going to happen in the world. So I'm going to move through the presentation here and basically give you a rundown on sharks. So is it too late to help sharks? Is it too late to stop the situation they're in? What you see at the upper part with sharks, there's some shark finning, and on the lower part there you actually see manta ray gill rakers that have been taken out for the manta ray gill raker trade, which has exploded in the last 5 to 10 years. So in terms of the global status of sharks, this was a recent study that was done. Sorry, I'm not in presentation mode here, so I don't have all my notes, but it was a recent study that was done a few years ago, and it basically breaks down the scope of, from a scientific standpoint, of where sharks are. So critically endangered, 2%, endangered, 4%. I can run through the list, but data deficient, 47%. So at this point, the scientific community still has a gap in knowledge about where we are with sharks. In terms of regional status, sharks and rays, pelagic, open ocean, 1/3 are threatened with extinction. Hammerhead sharks, they've declined by 89% since 1986 in the Northwest and Central Atlantic. Great hammerheads, they've declined by 80% in the East Atlantic. Porbeagle and spiny dogfish sharks. Porbeagles I've come to really like. They're like little great white sharks, and they finally got some protection they need. But in the Northwest Atlantic, they've been reduced by 90%. Sharks in Europe, 1/3 threatened with extinction, and 14 species of sharks and rays in the Mediterranean are critically endangered. And what's not on here is also oceanic whitetips, which are an amazing shark, are over 90%, 98% actually, gone. So the top shark-catching countries, they account for nearly 80%. So the top 20 shark-catching countries account for 80% of sharks caught. More than 35% come from the top 4 shark-catching countries, which are Indonesia, India, Spain, and Taiwan. So demand and understanding demand. So you can see a whale shark being cut up here on one side, and on the other side, the other photo that looks like it's in a box, those are dried gill rakers. So what is it that people want from sharks? A lot of different things. There's a lot of different body parts and elements to a shark. In terms of the shark trade, what's really driving it right now is shark finning, and that's what we touched on in the video. And in terms of mantas and their cousins, mobula rays, it's the gill rakers, the parts of the manta that filter the water that comes out. Okay, so overexploitation, key drivers, supply and demand. So what's causing this? Well, overfishing, which has been talked about already by the other 2 speakers today. Finning, which we saw in the video, and then bycatch. And how do we break the chain? How do we break this chain of overexploitation? So tackling supply, tackling overfishing, finning and bycatch, and reducing demand by the product and location. And there's a wide range of environmental groups, and I work for one of them, that work on marine conservation, and they tackle the whole gambit of all of these different realms. And I guess, David and Richard would argue that another component could also be sustainability and helping to give people other choices. Tackling supply with overfishing, how do we do that? Well, effort reduction. There's too many boats in too many places, and they're too efficient in their effort. And that was already brought up earlier in another talk. Science-based management, we need catch limits, prohibitions for specific species, precautionary approaches, and we need to minimize waste. And in a perfect world, we wouldn't catch sharks, but that's not the world we're in at this particular time. So I'm going to move through. This is the video that we saw. So tackling supply and bycatch, we need gear restrictions for long lines, trawls, and gill nets, and prohibitions on retention. I don't think most people are aware that bycatch results in an enormous amount of marine species being caught and wasted, not just sharks. And that they're, just for example, there's large nets that have separated from fishing fleets that they're still out there in the North Pacific that can be 15 to 20 feet deep, catching, and 20 miles long, just catching bycatch permanently. Defining trenches, the global. So how do we tackle this from a global level? Well, CITES, the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Flora and Fauna. That's a UN agreement that Project Aware's put a lot of effort into. It helps to ban, limit, or monitor the international trade of sharks or rays with a binding international agreement and hopefully implementation and enforcement. The problem with any global agreements is it's great if everybody signs on to them, and they are powerful, but it all comes down to implementation and enforcement. Convention on Migratory Species, which develops regional conservation plans, and that's also backed by the United Nations, an international plan of action for sharks to assess, protect, and minimize, and encourage shark conservation. And then doing this locally, there are, again, many different approaches to shark conservation, and there's a lot of controversy within the shark conservation world between different organizations. No one approach, they're all different, they all do good things. You need to find one that you align with, and each organization, there's many here, offer different things. But from a local level, fin bans are very popular right now in the United States, especially. Possession, distribution, and trade, and I'm sure many of you have heard in the news about fin bans in California and other states. Area closures within the oceans, closing off specific areas, allowing sharks to have time to rebound. Locally managed marine areas. We don't have in here also marine protected areas. So what do divers bring to the table? And so, this whole event this weekend's focused around the oceans. You've got a heavy element from the dive community and the Colorado Scuba Retailers Association, and a lot of people here that love the ocean. It's my first time to Colorado, and it's very heartening to see this. And I'm originally from Canada, and it's the same in Canada. The largest sector of people that seem to have the most money and focus on the ocean is in Alberta. So there must be something about the prairies or the middle of the country. Okay, so what do we bring to the table as divers or as people that love the ocean? Well, economic power, economic and political power. Divers, I don't think, realize that they have that, and it hasn't coalesced very well until recently. For example, the global shark and ray tourism has an estimated value of $310 million US. So if those animals are alive and in the ecosystem, that's micro-level development. It's great if somebody is a diver and spends thousands of dollars to go diving, which I like to do, but ultimately we want people in communities on small Pacific islands, for example, to have a long-term form of economic development that's going to encourage them to save these animals and take ownership over saving them rather than taking part in, for example, the shark finning trade. When I was at CITES actually in Thailand earlier this year. CITES happens every few years, and this particular statistic was used a lot, and it got a lot of attention. For the first time, the delegates that were attending, they were very surprised that the dive community had come together, that we'd put out coherent information, and that we tied it to an economic outcome in terms of these animals being alive in the ecosystem. We have a unique niche. People who dive get into the ecosystem, they see and experience it in a way that very few other people can. It's one of the unique things we can do on our planet. Not all of us can go to space, but you can have a similar experience through diving. And that's an epiphany that for most people drives them to marine conservation. It is for me. When I did my dive course, especially in the Philippines about 12 years ago, and my wife, we both left that experience wanting to devote our lives to marine conservation. And it took us a little while, but we both have. So local actions to behavior and policy change. We had, in one of the previous sessions this morning, we had an example where we have a policymaker from California who's allying now with people here in Colorado and trying to drive change and realize we have the economic and political power to do that. Local actions connected to global effects. So we can't ignore large overarching, this is a global problem, so it's great if we look at it locally, but we also have to look at it globally. So we touched on the European Union finning ban. What that means in simple forms is that any European Union vessel globally is no longer allowed to fin sharks in the definition of finning sharks. And CITES, which I touched on earlier. CITES was a huge victory this year. 8 species of vulnerable and threatened sharks and rays were protected, several of them for the very first time. The only one the sawfish got moved up in protection, all the other animals were new. Mantas got listed. Nobody expected that to happen. When you have an animal like the poor beagle shark that's been they tried 3 times, 3 different CITES spread over a decade or more to try to get that animal protected, and finally it got protection, or oceanic whitetips that are 98% gone. It was very emotional, very amazing. The most amazing part for me was to see that the reason that these animals got protected, it was great. The United States played a great role, and so did the European Union, but it was really West Africa and Latin America that came together. And we needed those countries to come together and do that. So divers and sharks, your voice, your support for protections matters. Don't ever discount your voice. Our entire political process sometimes seems driven on discounting our voice or making us feel that we don't have any power, and we do. If you don't take that power and exercise it, then you don't have a voice, but we do. And a good example of this is Project Aware worked for 3 years to get a petition with 130,000 signatures on it. It was the largest petition that was provided at CITES for any animal that was worked. Actually, sorry, second largest. The largest was for polar bears, which didn't win. Second largest was this petition that we offered. So, and this petition and the amount of people that signed on to it got the attention of celebrities. Which is always helpful. We had Leonardo DiCaprio finally pay attention to some of these marine animals. Divers and CITES, so I've talked about it earlier. This was just shows you some of the animals that were protected. Sawfish are really amazing. They got the full protection, which means they aren't going to be traded anymore. So just to clarify, CITES regulates trade. It doesn't stop it. Sharks will still be caught globally, the ones that are not regarded as vulnerable or threatened, and they will still be traded and people will still eat them. And there's 176 member countries that signed on to CITES. Sharks need you. So join the movement. Many organizations are doing great work. For Project Aware, we have to our knowledge, the largest online social media site for the oceans called MyOcean. We don't regulate it, or you can go on there and post, as long as it's polite, you can go on there and post anything you want. And we also have an Ocean Action Project where we give $30,000 of micro-level funding out to people who apply to us for that, and then it's voted on Facebook. And that's just my org, but there's a lot of orgs here today, and I encourage you to go to their booths and talk to them. We all have some of us have the same approach as us, some of us have different ones in different topics. We're all trying to work on different components of the puzzle, and just another element is the oceans are 71% of our planet, and they're less than 3% protected. Land is 29% of our planet, and it's 12% protected. 1% of all the money that goes to the environmental movement goes to marine conservation. So we're getting 1% of the funding for 71% of our planet. And all of us who are like-minded in the nonprofit world, it's very stressful to raise the money, it's very challenging, and we're all fighting over a very small piece of the pie. So don't discount your contribution from a volunteer or donation basis. I know all of the orgs here would appreciate it, and we can do a lot with a little. And for the dive instructors, or anybody else who's interested, learn about shark conservation and teach it. Set a standard, lay down the guidelines of what to do with sharks and in terms of interacting with them when you're in the water, and how to take part in shark conservation. And then fuel the movement. I just touched on 1% for 71%. Donate and volunteer. Don't discount your time. I think in terms of my time, I'm within 36 seconds, so I'll leave more time for people to be able to talk and ask questions. And thank you very much.